RosalieWil mentors clergy in the field and consults on issues of worship, music, and synagogue transition and change. She is also the founder and executive director of Sing Unto God and serves as lead consultant for the Union for Reform Judaism on issues related to music and worship.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Trimble. I'm the CEO of Convergence, and I am delighted to be in conversation with my friend, my colleague, RosalieWil. It's so good to see you. Thank you for this time. Yes. So when I thought of the topic, future of spirituality, and then thought of all of the rich conversations that you and I have had in conferences, but then also just in Zoom conversations, I thought I'd really love to get your thinking on this topic. As we begin, why don't you tell folks what you're up to and what your background is, so we have a sense of who you are.
Excellent. Thank you. Really happy to be here in conversation with you and all of those who are listening. I'm trained as a cantor in the Reform Jewish movement, served a congregation for 16 years outside DC. And much of my work in congregation, I was always sort of thinking about what was happening in other congregations and other communities, and always really interested in how, particularly as Reform Jews, we could think more meaningfully about prayer, about how communities gather for worship. My background in all of it is as a song leader. From when I was really young, I had a guitar on and I loved singing at camp and singing with people. And so my entree even to being a cantor and to wanting to be clergy was always about building communities and the community's voice and how our collective voices had power. So what I've transitioned into now is both helping congregations, liberal, progressive Jewish congregations, think more meaningfully about building worship that is true to their values, that lives out what they believe their mission to be in the world, helping them think about engaging all of the voices of those in their congregation and all those outside. So I work as a consultant and a cantor in residence. And I've started a non-for-profit called Sing Unto God, which is really designed to network and to curate and to gather people from all over the Jewish world and some in the non-Jewish world who want to think about what the future of communal worship is, different than individual prayer, private prayer practice, but what does it mean to gather in sacred communion and pray? And what's the relationship between how we sing, where our voices come into that experience, and how communities thrive, how communities feel cohesive? We'll be providing programs and opportunities for people to think really deeply. And one of the things I'm passionate about is about how we pipeline and scaffold the next generation of leaders to lead in communities, to bring sacred community together. So those are the things I'm thinking about and hoping to explore with lots of folks who want to think about those things, like you.
I think it's brilliant what you're up to. And I look forward to supporting it as it continues to develop. So the topic of our summit this time is a question of what is the future of spirituality? So when I throw that gigantic question at you, what comes to mind? What contours do you see?
Well, I see a few things. I think one of the things that I come back to, whether it's the future of our spirituality or what it means to sort of have faith and be in faith communities, is a sort of balance between individual storytelling. How can people find their own voice and their own story told in the context of a group experience? So if I'm in a praying community, or if I'm want to feel connected to the universe, how does my individual voice matter? That I'm not just a part of the Borg, I'm not just a person, but I actually have a unique frame and a unique story and a unique background and unique needs. So how does my story get told? That I think would make me feel more spiritually connected to others because it's unique. And at the same time, how can our communities do a better job of lifting up all of those who are on the outside? So while I need to have an individual voice, how can I step back and allow others to tell their stories. So to me, a spirituality exists when I am both in sort of connection to myself and I feel valued, and at the same time, when I'm able to say, I'm not the only person in this space, that because I'm connected to humanity, there are other stories here that need to be told. I feel like in this post-pandemic time, both the loneliness we felt and the need to connect was very personal, and at the same time revealed how much we needed to be in relationship with the other. So it's this sort of give and take. I think our spiritual future has to be able to do both, to lift up the individual and connect us more meaningfully to other people.
I couldn't agree more. I'm struck by today, one of the statistics, or one of the ways that people report out their feeling of connection, is that actually they're feeling quite isolated, that they're feeling quite unseen, unheard. That's a present reality, that as we think about the future, there's this common intuition. I don't know anyone who says, well, that should continue. We should continue to feel lonely and disconnected and, unseen and unheard. So there is this, I think, part of all of us who realize, if we're to stay healthy and if we're to sort of be in the flow of God, source, love, however we want to talk about that there is this way of needing to be connected to self and others, that is the pathway by which that happens, or one of its primal expressions. When you think about worship and the practice of communal prayer together, communal singing together, communal seeking the sacred together, what do you hope that we will center and value as we're moving into these days and that are to come? Like, what feels really essential that we hold on to?
I think what feels really essential is the sort of same idea of the value of the individual. And I think that's really hard to do. I mean, I don't know how to do it necessarily. I mean, part of the work is for each community or each person to discern that. But particularly in these days, I think because we learned so much the value, whether it was in Zoom worship, of individual storytelling. And we heard from so many people that when they gathered for worship on Zoom, they felt seen and heard sort of for the first time, because they had voice. In many religious experiences, the clergy presents the stuff and we all bow and sit and stand and sing at the appropriate times. And it's wonderful, but it could be how does the individual not say, did it matter that I was here at this time and this place? Maybe not. But I think we felt that during the pandemic. So for me, to keep central, how do we still allow every individual to show up as a unique being who feels like they matter, that this whole thing we're doing doesn't work unless that person is there, and that they have a story to tell in that, even if it's not an actual story, that they matter. I don't know how to build that. And then again, at the same time, it's very communal. So there's this sense of, but I'm willing to step back and make space for others. It's the dance of that. I think if we can hold those two seemingly contradictory ideas as one, which is that every individual matters, but yet we all have to step back and make space. My colleague, Rabbi Ken Chasen, talks about perfectly imperfect, that when we gather, that we get some of what we need some of the time, but we at least have to be able to say, I was a part of this experience and it mattered. I think that has to be central. If not, we go back to people just watching a good show or feeling like.
Yep. I think you said it so beautifully though. And in your saying it, it felt like an invitation to me that that there's something about you, the uniqueness of you being in community with us, that's the gift. So, it's not that you matter because you're a narcissist. It's that you matter because there's a uniqueness that God has placed within you, or that we see God's reflection in you. and your being with us adds something to the experience for the benefit of all. I think. Do I have that?
That is
Am I
exactly
hearing
right.
what you're
I
trying to
think
say?
you said it even more beautifully. I think that that's right. I mean, it's the challenge of particularly prayer in most traditions when there's a liturgy, because we often imagine that our job as the prayer or the congregant is to enact the text, enact the script that we've been given to be a. But the question is, are we the audience of a play that's being performed, or are we the actors in the play? And I'm curious about what it is that if we are the actors. I mean, yes, we have lines, but what's my motivation here? Like, why am I here? And that the liturgy is just a way to invite that, as opposed to I'm here to do what's obligated to me to do, of saying the prayers and of showing up. But I actually have a part. And if I don't say, if I'm not here to play my part, the whole thing, it's not going to work. I'm just curious about how we do that, how we can create that kind of container.
I love
I think
it.
that's exciting.
Yep.
That's exciting.
I'm thinking about my friend, a man named Brian McLaren, who once said, or I'm going to at least credit him for saying, that every movement needs a new song to sing. And my sense of, and tell me if I'm off on this, but my sense of the Reform Jewish movement, and the more progressive Christian movement, and maybe probably more progressive of many of the faith traditions, is there's a movement energy. There's a, where people on the move, on the way. I'm wondering, is there a new song emerging, or is there a new, do you see new energy behind the music, or this is a clumsy question. I'm trying to get at, how has the music changed for you, I guess, over the many years that you've been leading?
It's a good question. And I think, again, I think, I don't, after, some number of minutes, everyone think like we're saying the same, story in different ways. Cause I think we continue to, it goes back to a central place, which is, in a few moments, I think what's changed most significantly, and where the new song is developing, is a real awareness of the diversity of experience, and not just diversity in a DEI way, though that's a piece of it. But so on the one hand, that there are, at least in the Jewish tradition, there are many different communities that people come from to be in Jewish space all over the world. So there's a sense of, beyond sort of the Eastern European Ashkenazi Jewish experience, there's a real focus on us recognizing that. And just the many different ways people come to Jewish community, either as Jews or as Jewish adjacent, or as part of a sacred Jewish community, who might not be themselves of the Jewish faith, but have, are interested in being part of a Jewish communal story, might have different backgrounds and different stories to tell. So the music has shifted to be both more reflective of the diverse stories that we all are telling as individuals, and trying to shine a light on those people who, again, maybe haven't come into our spaces, who haven't felt invited in the same way into our spaces, because the music wasn't reflective of their experience. I mean, it's one thing to say wonderful words of welcoming, but as we know, music is very powerful. We all have music we love to listen to, or concerts we go to, or, iPod playlists. It's very personal. And so imagine being in a space where none of the music might be familiar week to week, but none of the music feels at all resonant to who you are and where you come from, even if it's a certain rhythmic form. Or we think about, the Jews in Muslim lands where they use quarter tones. So our very Western music, it's not bad or good, but that doesn't make, that's not familiar to them. I often teach, when I do music and worship change, there's no such thing as traditional. I don't use the word traditional, because there's no one tradition. Whose tradition? Oh, that traditional X. Somebody who is an Iraqi Jew never heard that before. That doesn't remind them of home. That doesn't remind them of their grandmother. And it doesn't sound anything like anything comfortable or familiar. So it goes back to, how does an individual feel? Not all the time, but, that's just, somebody's telling my story. that sounds like that's part of me and my well, I belong here, as do you in your story, which is really different. I never heard that before. Tell me more. So I think the music is one of the great gateways to sort of paint that and build that tapestry of all of those stories together. And that's where we're moving. I think in many of the liberal Jewish spaces, I don't know if it's true, but in the justice work I do, in non-Jewish spaces too, it's a lot of, there's so many different musical expressions, and we should be paying attention to what excludes and what is more welcoming.
Yeah. Either eradicating that concept of traditional or making it all traditional. Expanding or eradicating. You know, before we started recording, you were reflecting on that that young people are not singing, not learning to lead singing in the same way that historically we've kind of trained up the young to continue these traditions. I wonder, could you say more about that and kind of help explain what you're seeing? Because I think we're all seeing this. It's just, you've got a unique insight into this.
Sure. I think it's really like prescient for many folks. My partner is doing some work with the Mormon Church, and we've been talking to them a lot about, they have a really good system of, even beyond the missionary piece, of like relationship with young people and building that. And I think most of the communities I connect with don't do that very well for a host of reasons. For us in the sort of music and song leading world, I think there are a lot of young people who, through youth movements and through being connected through a synagogue or being sort of at home in a community where maybe they have a camp experience or some kind of youth group experience, loved to sing together and maybe learned how to song lead and really valued the communal voice. And then many people go to college and they either lose that sense of communal singing, or they're in such a great period of exploration of all different other learnings and other faiths or other ways of sort of being in the world. You know, they're adulting for the first time. And we have not done a good enough job of both staying in relationship with young people when they're in college, or then saying, well, we'll see you again. We'll see you when you have children and want to find a place for a religious education for your student, or when you start to get of an age where you feel like you should probably belong to a temple because that's what your parents did, or those things. And by then, many young people have, forgotten, or they love to play their guitar, sing with a few friends in their apartment, but they're not as interested in communal singing. And if they are, they're walking into our spaces that often are not inviting of that. The only singing we do is at worship, which is at a very specific time, often inaccessible to younger people or not of interest by us, Friday night or even Saturday morning. And it's not the same. It doesn't feel very communal. It feels very frontal or led. And so the places where we do see young people staying engaged is where they create their own. They create their own emerging community. They invite people over and have a drum circle or have a singing circle at a campfire. We see lots of young people singing in justice spaces, even faith music, but they're not fearful like my generation was to sing Jewish songs or songs with any kind of liturgical or theological focus in public. They have no fear of that. But they love to sing at a march or at a rally or at an action of some kind. So I think our organized religious spaces are not doing a good enough job staying in relationship and then finding ways for young people to sing together and to lead one another. Instead, they're being asked to sort of follow the leader, but yet we're saying, you are the future, you should lead, but we got this. So I think there's a renewed focus on that, of growing a group of young people who can lead communal singing, who are passionate about it, and who want to bring others along. We have to do a better job of it, I think.
Yeah. So in my tribe, I'll talk about mine so I don't insult anyone else's. We would say we should totally invest in young people learning about communal singing, and we should invest in young people because we want them to come back to the congregation and, sing us in our funerals, or, support this
Right.
institution that I've given my life to, and I want to pass on, so it's this come back to this thing that existed and serve this thing. I mean, I can tell just in your body language and knowing you as I do, but so there, if this tension exists in your space as well, where do you see that going? Because I hope it's not an overstatement, I don't see young people flooding our institutional religious spaces, even when they're shaped and supported in communal singing. So what's a third way, maybe, or how do we nurture and celebrate the practices and the stories of faith, but not fall prey to that, come back and support this thing we built? And
I think it would take some may, right? It's not
that's great if they do.
Right. It's great if they do, and some do, but what we're all seeing is very similar.
Yeah.
I think it takes just a lot of courage, sort of a courageous faith and a trust. Particularly like in the Jewish tradition, we often remind ourselves, like, it all ebbs and flows. When we say, like, it's always been like this. No, synagogues, there's 50 years. Like, it'll all be okay, is my philosophy. But to be more specific, I think it takes a courageous community or courageous leadership to say that the institution isn't the only way. And it doesn't mean that the institution will die, but to really rethink or to be additive to what it means to gather in community. If we were to take away the buildings, which frankly we did for COVID, community not only survived, but thrived. So we actually, full stop, we know that it works. There might have been fatigue, and eventually we can't do this all the time, but we can gather in so many spaces. And so the courage to say, we're not just supporting young people to come back. One, it's unclear what we're coming back to. Again, if we're not thinking beautifully about what it is that we do when we're together, what is worship and how is that meaningful? And that we let go of our fear or our sense that institution and building or movement equals faith, equals a religion that has value. And I think they've become, at least I can speak to like the Reformed Jewish tradition, which built buildings like the churches. We did what everyone else did. Your faith happens in a building at a certain time. But over time, it's become that my Judaism, my history, memory, Torah, teaching, all of it is so synonymous with institution or building that if they are not coming, that means that they don't care about Judaism, or Judaism is dying. Judaism isn't just a building. So to just be courageous that those folks will build in different ways. They'll gather, and they are. We're hearing that from the research. They're meeting, they're studying, they're engaging in different ways. I think if we can rethink where we gather, when we gather, how we gather, there's lots of good Jewish stuff happening at social justice rallies. It's really Jewish. People are quoting Torah and lifting up Jewish values. What difference does it make that they might not come into a building? Yeah, we have to pay the rent, but maybe long-term buildings won't look like that. You and I will share a space so that when we need to be indoors, we're indoors, but who knows what happens in the building. But it doesn't mean that the values of Judaism or what history and memory and what our grandparents built doesn't matter. I think young people would say, of course it matters. We've been given so much that we're ready to create that. And I think we're getting stuck, and it's just, we need to be more courageous about training young people, making songs, not to come back and just, as you said, sing at our funerals. And maybe they will some, but it'll be, and they're going to be Jewish or, Christian or Methodist or Baptist out in the world. And isn't that even better? That they're just walking the world with their faith than that they only bring it 2 days a week for these 90 minutes. Like I'd much rather the opposite.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and probably both, right? But I find it enormously exciting, actually, that it feels very much like we've almost been unleashed on the world, that we've been set free from these practices and buildings and things that had maybe created some artificial boundaries for us that now, people who I think you so beautifully named, uh, lived at the margins of that institutional experience now have a chance to find their place and make their unique contribution.
That's
So
right.
it gives me.
I think the irony, sorry to interrupt, is that I think if we can, again, if we're really bold, and I'm an optimist, I've always been an eternal optimist, is I actually think at the end of, I don't know when the end moment is, but that the communities will actually grow. That if we are able to give space to those folks, whether now at the margins they feel seen, or we aren't worried about what's happening outside, when folks do need or want a building or want to commit more of their time and treasure and energy, they'll be more willing to come back to a community that said, we support you wherever you are. We consider you one of us, even if you can't pay us dues or you don't come at these specific times, but we value you. I think it'll pay off in the end, and that our communities will be larger, richer, more full of people if we're able to create that opportunity and widen the container.
I think you're exactly. I completely agree. I think you're brilliant. I'm personally quite excited about the idea actually of you being unleashed in the world, and that you're uniquely positioned to be a convener of these kinds of conversations. And having seen you in action, extraordinarily talented at holding this space that gets harmonized in a way that is just absolutely breathtaking. So I don't know, is there a place that people can follow your work, or do they just bombard you with emails, or how do we connect into what you're up to?
I appreciate all of that, Cameron. You're very generous, and it's wonderful. I hope for everybody to find partners, to find kindred souls, spirits who are walking the path together, and not necessarily lockstep, but who can ask questions and challenge and push and grow. So I feel grateful and very privileged to have you in my life as a new friend and partner on this exciting journey, because I do think it's exciting. It is scary for all of us, to be sure, but I think there's so much richness to come. My website, where I do most of my consulting and teaching, is RosalieWil.com, and the organization that has some Jewish and some non-Jewish partners that's really trying to convene lots of folks to think about worship and communal singing together is singuntogod.com. And that's a place to come and really join our conversation. We're building a community from all of the participants, and we'd love to hear more voices in the conversation.
I love it. If you could think of one word that the rest of us could use as a beacon as we're dreaming of this future of spirituality, but a word that kind of holds your hope for what is ahead. Is there a word or even a phrase that comes to mind that is in you that could be in us?
That's a good question. I think opportunity. I think when I feel that we're stuck, or there's no way to do something, or a community is really unsure, I think just thinking opportunity gives me hope, that there's opportunity not just for our work, but in every person. There's an opportunity to give, to move, to tell stories. So opportunity is what I keep going back to in my work.
I love it.
My life.
Yes. I am grateful to be on this planet at this time with you in my life. And I'm grateful that others are now getting to meet you. And I have hope for our future because of this. Thank you for this time.
Thank you.